Okay, well, I'm Walter Schultz, and I'm currently 77 years old and counting, and have spent most of my life in Cleveland Heights. Was born down the hill at University Hospital, and my parents, we moved around quite a bit because they never owned a home in Cleveland Heights. And well, we had one foray into Moreland Hills and one a short stay in Lyndhurst, but we lived in a lot of rental homes or in family homes in Cleveland Heights. I have a brother and a sister, both considerably younger. My parents didn't want to rush into anything after they had me. It took them 6.5 years to have my sister Ellen, they were again scared, and it took them another 6.5 years to have my brother Ernie.
How did your parents end up in the Heights? What do you know?
Well, they were both born here. I mean, our roots go. My mother was born, 2 miles from here, and my father, I don't know if he was born in a hospital or at home, but they were always Cleveland Heights people. So, yeah.
Do you know how they ended up, how their family ended up here? What do you know about your
I
grandparents?
don't. Well, my grandparents, my mother's parents, came to Cleveland for a job. My grandfather was and my grandmother were both from Tuscarawas County.
What are their names?
Uh, my grandmother was Emma Haas, or Wassam rather, and my grandfather was Charles Wassam. I have long memories of my grandmother, but not my grandfather. He died when I was like 2 years old, 3 years old, so 2 years old I think. So, and I have an uncle that I'd never met. He was off at war. So my mother's parents came here. He was a long time college graduate. He graduated from Ohio Northern in about 2000 or 1903 or 1904, and he came back and met my grandmother, and she was a school teacher in Tuscarawas County. In those days, you didn't need credentials. You took the best student, and she became the teacher for the next generation. And then he moved to Cleveland and worked here for National Acme for 30 years until he developed tuberculosis and retired back down to Dover, Ohio. My paternal grandparents, he was from. I've done all my genealogy now, so I know a little bit about them. Yeah, they came from Germany in about the early 1880s. My grandmother Schultz, that was my grandfather Ernest. My grandmother Alice was from Painesville, and I don't know just why they ever chose Painesville, but she came to Cleveland to go to nursing school, and apparently they met here. I don't know the details of how they got together, and so they were at that point it was East Side people, and then eventually they moved to the Heights, probably in the 20s or the teens, and raised their family here. So our Cleveland Heights roots go back 3 generations. In this case now 5 generations.
Yeah, isn't that fun?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
What do you think about it? Isn't that pretty?
I think it's pretty cool. Yeah, I mean, despite the changes in the neighborhood over the years, that they've managed to stay close.
So, I mean, we don't want to jump. We don't necessarily have to jump ahead, but it's pretty unusual, right, to see
Oh.
all of your daughters, all 3 of your daughters, and their husbands are all locals.
Right.
Like, it's
Yeah,
very,
right, yeah.
Old school. And
Right.
it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah, or small town.
Yeah.
That's what you find in a small town where no one ever, left the county basically, and you married somebody you went to school with, or somebody your brother or sister went to school with. Yeah.
But Cleveland Heights is a lot different, right? Like,
Yeah, you would
describe
never.
what it was like when you were growing up.
You would never expect that. Yeah, when I was growing up, this kind of neighborhood, and most neighborhoods, would have day help. Somebody come in at least once a week, maybe more, to do the laundry, and because laundry was an ordeal in those days. You didn't have automatic washing machines, and polyester clothes that didn't require ironing, that you had to, spend a lot of time going up and downstairs doing laundry and running things through the wringer and putting them out in the on the clothesline to dry and ironing them. That was a big project, particularly if you had a big family.
Was there a sense back then of like Cleveland Heights was sort of this elite?
Oh,
neighborhood in terms of the
absolutely,
people that founded
absolutely.
it? Like, describe what you knew, like.
Well, I mean, we had all kinds of wealthy and famous people living here. I mean, John D. Rockefeller lived down the street, So, you can't get much more moneyed than that. And in this neighborhood, you can see how the houses were designed to have even a live-in help with the back stairs and stuff like that. That you needed help to take care of these houses and keep up with the Joneses.
I think the witnesses are making their rounds.
Oh no!
That never changes, right?
Good Lord! How many people do they find at home these days during the week? Yeah, do they ever get anybody?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah.
So, your dad had a family business, right? What was
Right.
the
Well,
family
yeah.
business?
My grandfather Schultz was a plumber. Yeah, and my dad never finished high school. He dropped out at ninth or 10th grade, I guess, and went to work for his father, and eventually ran the business, until he died. So, and this became part of the family business. The business was run out of the garages in the back of the house on Lee Road, and which we lived in and out of over the years. And there was a large sunroom, probably twice the size of yours, that was the office. And one of my mother's jobs then, she was home all day, was to answer the business phone and take orders and calls.
What was the address?
1785 Lee Road. Yeah, it's near the corner of Euclid Heights Boulevard and Lee.
And what do you remember about Heights High? Like, what was your time at Heights like? It was like probably the Heights at its prime almost.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It was just growing. The schools got. Let's go back to elementary school and start that. I started elementary school in '45, and by the time at Fairfax, and by the time I graduated, the school population has swelled so from the baby boomers that the elementary schools were getting crowded, and to make room for that, and they were adding Wiley, for instance, was in the works to create more junior high school capacity. But at the time when there was no brick and mortar, what the school board did was take the sixth grade, which junior high used to be 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, and what they did was and there were 2 classes per each grade. There was a 6A and a 6B. I don't know if you ever experienced that or heard anybody talk about it. So it would, it depends if you were born in the first half of the year, the second half of the year. The bigger class was the June class, but there was a smaller January class. Those kids that was very awkward for those kids, because when it came time to go to college, you were out of phase with everybody else. But in any event, they took and split the 6th grade, and so after the first half of 6th grade in January, they took those kids and sent them ahead to the junior high school. And to create more capacity, they took the 9th graders between halfway through the year and sent them to the high school. So they just shifted some students to create capacity until they could build more units. So
and you didn't go to the same Fairfax that I went to.
no, it was a traditional building. Obviously, my aunt taught there. So yeah, it was a totally different experience. I mean, and at the high school, that wing across the front hadn't been built yet. It looked much like the school that they've regenerated up there now, and from the exterior, quite different inside. And but it was a very interesting time Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, just in terms of ethnicity of the student body, is basically totally reversed. I mean, you could count the number of minority students on two hands and out of a school at that point of I think it was 2,700, something like that.
At its peak, I think Heights almost got to over
4,000,
right?
yeah, at one point, yeah, it's 3,600, something like that. I think it's probably the largest school in the state.
And people talk about it as even as one of the best high schools.
Oh yeah,
in the state,
well, at
right?
that point it was, yeah. All the
Your mom went there.
right. My mom went there. Yeah,
Did your dad drop out of Heights High?
yeah, well, yeah,
Did they
or
know each
middle
other
school.
maybe?
I don't know if he ever got beyond junior high school. I don't know exactly what point. Well, I guess wasn't unusual in those days. Yeah.
So at Heights, what were you involved in? Did you have any extracurriculars? What were your
Yeah. I started out. I played football and track in junior high, and I started that at Heights, and eventually I got through JV football and decided the kids were bigger and faster, and I had more dedicated than I was.
Did you have other interests? What did you?
Extracurricular, really nothing much. I was just kind of hung out with my friends, and well, I worked a lot, not during school years. I mean, I was a very self-reliant person because my parents weren't. I stepped in because my dad didn't, do much around the house, and so I ended up. By the time I was 10 or 11, I'm out pushing the lawnmower back in the day before power mowers.
Was there? Were you involved in the family business at all?
No. Very occasionally, if he needed someone to help, because he had people working for him, but very occasionally, if I had to move a hot water tank or something and nobody else was around, I'd get drafted to drive over to somebody's house and haul a hot water tank inside with him. Something he couldn't do by himself. Yeah.
Any girlfriends in high school? Any?
Oh yeah.
Any
Yeah.
friends you're still friends with? Like what was?
No, not really. None of which I see anymore. Basically at Heights, so many of the kids have moved away. You just don't even know where they are. I mean, I got the copy of the 50th graduating class yearbook, and what the kids are just all over the world and in the ground and everything else. It's amazing how things change in 50 years. Yeah.
So how did you? So you're a senior. How do you decide what your next step is going to be?
Watch your fingers on that. I'm going to catch that. Oh, I'm sorry.
Speaking from the chair.
Yeah, you're going to pick up the scratches too. Yeah, so in terms of going to college, how I ever decided, I don't know. It was just kind of fumbling around. I never used the services at school. I kind of was such an independent person that I always thought foolishly I'd like to be a diplomat at one point, despite having no skills in foreign language. You couldn't pick a more imperfect career for me. But so I ended up applying to some schools and finally settled on George Washington, which was kind of ironic. Urban school, it had a large local following. It's not like Cleveland State, but it had, it did have a large draw from the Northeast. So there was you couldn't walk two steps without hearing in New Jersey or New York or Maryland. Or Maryland has its own accents too. There's several accents in Maryland. Again, a school that was basically lily white, in a city even then was probably 30 or 40% black. Now it's much more integrated school, but there were, I mean, the basketball team, for God's sakes, was all white. If you can imagine that, and the football team, and most of the kids who were black that went there, and there weren't maybe two hands full, were sons of African diplomats or somebody like that. It wasn't a common man's school. So
what was your time like at George Washington?
oh, it was wonderful. It was very liberating. You know, by that point, I was ready to live on my own. The one thing you probably find you find appalling is that there were no food services for the dorms. You had to go out and eat off the land in the local restaurants and things. So I was very much self-sufficient at that point. I'd been, I'd regressing a minute. I'd had a paper route since I was 11 years old and delivered right till my senior year of high school. Every morning I'd go out and bat out those newspapers, and I had, for the time I was 14, I had jobs and worked every summer and at the school board, and I'd worked at the grocery store for a stint, and I had the keys to this big junior high school right next door to me. By the time I was in the ninth grade, so I knew how to get, and I was buying my own clothes and pretty much, and saved my own money for college. So I was pretty much self-funding for college. But I ended up having to work after the first year. I had to, I worked a couple jobs.
And so, what else about George Washington do you remember?
My
major. How far did you get along before you?
Oh, I got along great. I had hundreds of hours. I ended up switching my major. I think I started in business or economics. I started in economics, and that's where I stayed, basically, trying to get an economics degree. By then, my interests had shifted a little bit. I joined a fraternity, which obviously becomes your center of your social and.
Which fraternity?
Sigma Phi Epsilon. Yeah, it's one with the heart. Yep. And so a bunch of great guys. Yeah, a lot of locals. There's some out of towners. I don't have any relationship with them even today. I mean, it's kind of just faded away.
And I don't know. I've heard that you got into a little bit of trouble in D.C.
Little trouble? No, let's not call it trouble. It wasn't law trouble. It was.
It should have been.
Right. Yeah. I mean, to a lesser person, it might have been.
Worst nights in D.C. when you were.
Oh, I thought we weren't going to get into this.
No, we're gonna get all the yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So what did you
bait and switch here? Yeah.
What?
Well, okay.
Give me one.
Just give you one. Well, probably the. Let's think. How to express this?
You were carousing around the mall, right?
Well, that was all part of that of a larger evening. It's really a two-part story. I think we'll talk about the United States Capitol and all that. Okay, well, now you're not going to give this to the authorities, right? Well, it was going back from my sophomore, my junior year. My parents didn't drive me, which wasn't unusual. I'd flown down, and I had a big trunk that I'd shipped, air down, and when I got there in the evening, I think we were in the middle of doing a house restoration in anticipation of Rush coming, and they were remodeling the bathroom, and one of my fraternity brothers was a civil engineer major, and he was what today you would call an intern, but I think he was probably more of a paid person working for the superintendent of the of the job at the United States Capitol. They were extending the east front of the Capitol about the width of 2 rooms maybe, and then rebuilding it so that it looked just the same. So since the fraternity was restoring our own bathrooms, he'd set a few boxes of tile aside for our use. So in order to get and he had a car. By the time I got to the fraternity house that evening, he offered to drive over to the airport and pick up my trunk and with the rest of my stuff. And we had a little mission we had to do, and so we went down to the Capitol, and he had the key to the construction door, which underneath the steps of where they used to do the inauguration. There's a drive-through, and he had the key to the plywood construction door, and we went in and toured the place, and went up on the very top where the statue is, and climbed out on the. I never realized this until the last year or so. There's a balcony down about 20 feet down, but you can't do it. But anyway, we went up to the roof of the building, and you can go in the dome area, and the dome is really 2 domes. And it's supported by these huge wrought iron girders, that are all. It's amazing what they could do with wrought iron in those days before things were steel. And you go up the circular stairs, and you come out in a little turret-shaped top just below the Bronze Indian, which I've been up in, by the way. There's a ladder that goes up into that. So, but then we went out to get a better view. You can go through these narrow windows that are probably 15 inches wide, maybe 18 at the most. That they're on the perimeter of the room, and onto a ledge that's probably 2.5 feet, maybe. But the problem with the ledge is that it has columns between the windows. So you can walk around, but you kind of have to hold on the column to go. So we were out there. This was late at night, 11, 12 o'clock, something like that. And in those days, the Capitol Police were political jobs, and their job was to cash their paycheck and make sure the doors were locked at the end of the night and the lights were turned off. That was the extent of their security. So we got our tile and went back to the fraternity house and used it appropriately over time. And then
the statute of limitations is passed.
Right, I certainly hope so.
Tile. Probably really nice tile, though, right?
It was good, yeah.
Probably still in there.
I wonder if it's still there. It's not a fraternity house anymore. The university has it and made it into I'm sure that they don't need the showers and things like that. They've made it into offices, which is pretty common there. Those row houses are. They gobble up everything that's available. But then this leads to the big night where it was homecoming, and we decided to take our dates. There was probably 4 couples. After the dance was over on the other side of town, then we decided to stop at the Capitol at maybe 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock in the morning and show the girls the view from the... So Hans went in. Yeah, he was a Dutch guy. I think he'd lived here all his father worked for the International Monetary Fund. But in any event, we went in the door, and we went up to the roof and showed him around. And in the process, some of my fraternity brothers took one of the flags from the Capitol. So there's more than one. This is the one they. If you were to call and ask your congressman to get you a flag that flew over the Capitol, it's on a staff that all day long. I think they've got a couple of rummies that go up there and put it up, put it down, and so they can say it flew over the Capitol. So they took one of that flag, which I was against. I didn't think that was really a very smart idea, and we went up on the. We're wearing tuxedos, by the way. We're well-dressed thieves, and went up to the room on top of the dome, and the girls had their prom dresses, which in those days included crinoline skirts, that were out to here, and we had them out on the ledge and all that. Oh, this would have been so easy to fall off with those that stuff, but that was.
You don't have a selfie from that night.
That was way, way, way before selfies. So then we went. We were ready to leave, and lo and behold, the construction door had been locked from the outside. It was still a plywood door, and so you couldn't unlock it from the inside. So we were locked in the Capitol. So we went. I don't know why we just didn't go out the window in one of those rooms, but we went down the basement to those those elevators that come up through the sidewalk. Well, the Capitol has one of those, but they're very, very noisy. It was the stupidest thing ever. So we all got on the elevator and popped out and ran to our cars and took off. Oh, Jesus, that was so dumb. Yeah.
Were the ladies impressed?
What's that?
Were the ladies impressed?
Oh, they were very impressed. So then we weren't done. Then we went to the reflecting pool in front of the Lincoln Memorial and decided we'd do a little wading. And we were in there, and it's about wallet deep, by the way. It's slopes, and then it flattens out. But it was right at the level of my wallet.
You in your tuxedo?
Oh, no, tuxedo. It was a rental tuxedo. And rental shoes, too. What the hell? Yeah, so we did that. Yeah.
And so you spent 2 years at George Washington?
Oh, no, 4 years.
Oh, you were there?
3.5. Well, I lived in D.C. for 4, but I 3.5, basically, yeah.
Were you close to graduating?
Well, I had lots of hours, but I had bad hours, too. So I have, I had almost 120 hours semester hours when I left there. But I kept I couldn't pass languages very easily, so I had my stint of Spanish and my stint with German and things like that, and but I'm working at that point. I'm working. Yeah, I'm totally supporting myself. I was before, but it was from a bank account. Now I'm living hand to mouth basically in what I can earn in the summer and what I'd earned during the year. So for a long time I had a job as a building guard. It was my long-standing job, and was fortunate. That has its own set of stories too.
What building you guarded?
Penn 17. It's a block down from the White House, across the street from the White House. It had the most beautiful view of the White House from the roof. Yeah, which was always anybody come to town. I had the keys there to take them up to the roof and show them the aerial view of the White House. Back before when they had guys on the roof and all that. It was pretty primitive.
Yeah, binoculars. Could you have seen into the White? Do you think you could have seen?
No, I didn't. We never used binoculars or anything. And the family lives on the back side, so you're looking at the Pennsylvania Avenue side. Yeah. So. But that was a good, and I would work there only on Saturday and Sunday during the day. It was good because I could sit. All I had to do was sit in the lobby theoretically, and I could study. So I'd do 8 hours Saturday, 8 hours Sunday, and then that first year I did that job, I was also wasn't living in the fraternity house. I was living with a fraternity brother who was always playing the angles, and he got a job as the night guy in the building. And it was a new building. I watched it being built the first year I was there. You know, it's always an interesting project. There's 13-story buildings because the buildings in D.C. have to be less height than the top of the Capitol. So anyway, he got the job as another. This is leading to another interesting story. He got the job as a night guy, and then when I'd go home in the summer, he'd take my day job too. So I could. It was beautiful. The job was waiting for me when I came back to school. So that worked well. And then he got really ambitious later on. They built another building next to it, and they were connected underneath the parking garage. When they built the other building, they connected the parking garages. So he got the job as the night watchman in the next building as well, and would play both ends of the building. And his greatest fear was that the two building superintendents would be out back having a smoke someday, and discovered they were employing the same guy.
Well played.
Right. Yeah, and I had a number of other interesting part-time jobs, and working for the trust fund for the Teamsters Union. I worked for just a few months, I think. They paid their own medical bills and things like that, and we'd process some of those. It wasn't the Teamsters; it was the laborers, one class down, and that was interesting. And I worked for the Bureau of Social Science Research for a while, and then but my main job, I worked for the Committee for Economic Development for 3 years, after like 20 hours a week. So that was a real good experience for me.
How did you decide? So how did your time at George Washington end, and why? What was the decision?
Well, at that point, I was thrown out had to sit out for a year. So what I did at that point, I worked full time at the Committee for Economic Development. Our project was wrapping up, and I had the ability to really call my own hours, and they had deep pockets. But the issue there was that this was during the Vietnamese War, and the draft was, well in action, and the Army needed people. And the problem was, if you were out of school, you were vulnerable to get reclassified and drafted. So one of the guys I'd worked there with had joined a reserve unit over in Maryland, over by the University of Maryland. And I thought to myself, well, gee, this is the way to go. I don't want to get drafted. I can join. And it was a military intelligence unit, which I knew I wasn't going to get, probably not going to get shot up. And so if I did get called up. So I went over there and joined up, did all the processing locally at the armory over there, and with the intent of then, I didn't have the intent of defrauding the Army at that point, but my goal, at this point you've learned how to survive in the city and play the game. So I learned that this unit, I was waiting to get called up, but I'd also discovered that you could go on an inactive status almost right away. So I moved back to Cleveland then in the early summer of '63, and in the process, let's see how to say this. I moved back and I was waiting to get my orders to go to basic training. Okay, And by doing that, I became inactive at the unit I joined, and ultimately I never went to a meeting at that unit. So now I'm in the Army Reserves. I got my call up for 6 months. I was supposed to go to intelligence school after basic training, so I did my basic training at Fort Knox. And then, but at that point, the military was swarming with new enlistees. You know, they were just pulling them in by the boatload, and it was kind of tragic in a way that all these, and I was older than, the majority of the 18-year-olds flopping in there, and those kids were just getting sent off to Fort Polk or somewhere to be thrown into the infantry. But the problem was that they were behind in their security clearance. At that point, I don't think they contracted it out. It was an FBI function, and they just couldn't keep up. So I could have extended my 6 months and gone to intelligence school in Fort Holabird, which was in downtown Baltimore. And if I had done that, I'd have probably ended up back in D.C. But I said, well, I'll take my second option, which is to go to clerk school right there at Fort Knox and get out in 6 months. So that's what I did. And when I got out then, I was still in an inactive status. And what did they call that? They have a name for it. But anyway, in any event, I stayed in that status. I didn't join a unit in Cleveland, and I was, it's a good way to fall through the cracks, except here we are in the Vietnamese War, and it was at that point they'd started to call up reserve units to cover their needs. And what happens when they do that, if you call up a military intelligence unit or any kind of unit, because I was trained as a company clerk, and I'd served. You go to clerk school, and then you spend 2 months as a company clerk for a basic training company at Fort Knox. That I could have been called up by anybody because I had a military specialty that they could have used. So I was vulnerable. So I lived like that for about a year until they really started calling up units. And then I did another street smart thing. I joined, there was a sister unit, just like the one I had joined in D.C. in Garfield Heights. And that unit, fortunately, had been called up during the Berlin crisis. So my thinking was, well, they're going to be the last one to be called up this time around. So I did make some good decisions along the way.
My dad played the same game. That's why he joined the Navy, because he figured that the Vietnamese Navy wasn't a threat.
Right, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And he was a sonarman on an
Right.
aircraft.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
He had to go to Vietnam, but he was never in any danger.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's.
He's from Massillon, where lots of.
Yeah, almost everybody. Yeah, it was a rite of passage to join the military.
Yeah. Did you know anybody from Heights that was killed?
Yeah, I do. Actually, I probably didn't find out about. I think he was CIA. I think probably the first kid that died in my class. And I don't, I think that some of the names are in the, the alumni book. But a guy named Art Stillman was killed in Cambodia. I think before we were even fighting in Cambodia, and he was just a shrimpy little, Jewish intellectual kid that I assume he was on some mission there.
Early.
Yeah, very early, probably 63, 64, somewhere in that time frame.
So you avoid.
So I avoided the draft, and I got in with a great bunch of guys, and I got some of my friends like Charlie Mulligan in the unit, and a couple others from Heights. I don't know if you know the Zettelmeyers. One of them still lives up on Scarborough. In any event, that's the way and I was there until '69. It was more like a social club. It was a small unit. Had about at the peak 50 guys. We didn't have any of our own equipment, which is in the military is a good thing. You don't want to own have any jeeps or weapons or anything because you got to take care of them. So that the less you owned and the smaller your footprint, the better off you are in the military. And so when we go to summer camp or something, we borrowed jeeps from another unit, and we'd get some weapons that we might have had some M1s or something like that, which we never took out of the rack. And went off to war for 2 weeks in the summer, and that was a big party. There was really no social distinction between officers and enlisted men. Everybody was, was called by their.
So.
And you had relationships outside. Our company commander was a Major Matuszewski. Lived over in the Polish area there on Fleet Avenue. He ran a hardware store. His brother was a city councilman, and he was just Major Matt. He's just a stubby real nice guy. And the whole unit adopted that kind of a persona.
And how did you end up at Case?
Oh, well, going back then, when I came back here after my basic training, I'd worked one summer for my next door neighbor, Marv Sussman, who was head of the sociology department. And I'd worked they do social research studies, which I'd had experience in some of my part-time jobs at college and at the Committee for Economic Development. So I was very familiar with that academic world. And so I worked one summer there. So they needed somebody in their to run their data processing operation, which was a one-man show. So I took that job, and the advantage of that was I got free tuition. And the advantage of that is, given an academic environment, I could take off during the day and go take an hour and a half class and come back. So, and I was even there. My direct supervisor was an assistant professor, and I even took a class from him. So that's basically most of my college, except for my last year. Or last couple semesters, maybe it was the last year, I was close enough to getting a degree. I had all these hours, so I ended up graduating from college with over 155 semester hours when I needed 120 or 124. But they weren't good hours, so when you transfer, you're always going to lose a little bit anyway, and so. I was close enough, and I just got married that Sandy could support me, and we went and I finished up as a full-time student and graduated in January of '69.
What was your degree in?
Economic or business at that point. Yeah. So it was. I was going to say it was 9.5. I was a college student for basically 9.5 years. Back when professional college students, were really the in thing. Yeah.
Sandy said yesterday something about she had known you and she had dated one of your mutual friends for a while.
John.
Yeah, John.
Proudfit.
Proudfit, right?
Yeah.
Did you have an interest in Sandy when she was with John, or was it something that you guys were?
Well, not so much. I was interested in her. Another one of her roommates, Joyce, the one who just died a couple of years ago. So, so we kind of.
But then she said something about she saw you in your military uniform.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I was coming.
In Pennsylvania.
No, well, they were no. It was at the airport in Cleveland. I was coming. I was in the military doing my active duty at Fort Knox, and I flew home for the weekend, and I ran into Sandy and Millie and Joyce, I think, going to Dunkirk, and they were for some reason were flying to Buffalo to get to Dunkirk. So I ran into them at the airport. Yeah, that's the other end of that story. Yeah.
And do you remember? Did you ask her out? Like what?
Well, sometime after that, I think we went to to the car races at Mid-Ohio were coming up, so that was where that went.
And she talked about the first home purchase on Quilliams. Was that?
Yeah.
What do you remember about that house and settling there?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. I don't know why we ever. I mean, I was more used to the your end of Cleveland Heights, and that end was pretty much foreign to me. You didn't. So I don't know why we ever ended up.
South Euclid, though.
We lived in
So
South
you're close
Euclid
to there
on
at that
Liberty
point.
Road, it's near the fire station, City Hall, in South Euclid. Yeah, it's a.
And then, do you remember?
Well, she was present. She was. Yeah, she was pregnant at that point. Yeah, or we had the baby. We had Emily at that
Yes,
point.
you did.
Yeah.
And she actually told a story about that she called you one day at work to tell you that she needed to have a baby right away or something, or there was some phone call.
I don't
It was a
remember.
sudden-
I don't
it was
remember
a sudden
that.
thing where she's like 27.
The
and she realized-
hormones have kicked in.
Yes,
Yeah,
she was ready to go.
I don't
Yeah.
remember that.
All right. Are there anything you remember about Emily as a baby? Or as a young child?
I have to change speeds here.
Mhm.
Well, Emily was always Emily, being the oldest kid, and you and I have both had that experience. You're molded much differently than the second and third one. She was a good kid, really. I mean, you couldn't have asked for more. Yeah. Sandy was a stay-at-home mom at that point, which, I always didn't agree with. We could have used the money, obviously, but
Where were you working at that point?
at that point I was at. After I'd gotten my degree, I left the university and went to work for Bobby Brooks, which made junior women's clothing. It was a big outfit at the time. Yeah.
You were in logistics or in
Yeah, basically you'd
sales?
call it logistics. It's production planning, production control, product planning. Basically, what I ended up doing was basically product planning. They made dress lines. They made sportswear lines. Slacks and tops and swimwear. So I worked in those, and they'd have 4 or 5 seasons of a year, depending on the product line. That sounds unusual to somebody outside the business, but there were, spring, fall, winter, and summer. But there was also a cruise season, which was a smaller season that they'd throw in there between. And you were always working like 6 months ahead. Like right now, we'd be working on fall, for instance. And so it was it was a lot of fun to work there. It was you had things were always changing because the products would always be changing. Typically, I was for 4 or 5 years, I was a product planner, and you'd get a whole season where you'd be there when the designs are coming in. The new product would go to a product engineering group, which is like a master tailor, and he had some assistants and models and stuff, and they'd design what the designer had done. He would take that and adapt it to a product that could be manufactured at a specific cost. Okay, and then they'd give you a list of materials, and the marketing department would go through a process and determine what they thought this was going to sell. Typically, within a season, you'd have a number of different products that were based on the fabric or something like that, and so there may be 6 or 8 products in each one of these little categories, and there may be 2 or 3 or 5 colors within that, and they'd give an estimate of what they thought the market would take. And the situation being what it was, you had to order stuff based on those original projections. Then when the sales force hit the field for the next 6 or 8 weeks, the orders would come in and they'd be totally different. So the object was you order what you need to get started, and then you try and make changes or to reallocate fabric from pants to skirts or whichever direction the sales was going. And you had to also make product by size. So you had 5 or 6 sizes in each product that you had to, a lot of that, you had to make that original commitment before you ever sold a garment. So it can be a very dangerous business in terms of getting way down the wrong road. So it was, but you had total responsibility. No one ever sat there, and told you what to order. The other thing would be variable, that somebody would estimate it would take 1.2 yards to make this product, and it took 1.6 or something like that. So,
changes all the numbers.
yeah, right. So, things could go terribly, terribly wrong. So, yeah, you had to be very innovative and trim and things like that, which are things you don't think about. Buttons and lace and things like that go on the product. That was
and this time too, you started doing the Canada trips with.
Yeah, it was about the early.
Do you remember your first time going up there?
Early 70s. Yeah.
What was that? What do you remember from the early times?
Oh boy, the crowd had changed. People had come and gone, and in a way, it was always Pete is very regimented and tied to history, so you had to do the same things every year, make the same spots. Well, a trip that could have been done easily in 7 or 7.5 hours would take 12, because you had to stop at the hardware store in Coldwater, whether you wanted to or not. You had to eat lunch at this creamery in Barrie. When there might have been a lot better places closer, it was maddening. And in some ways, you just had to go with the flow and realize that these guys are not into change. And you had to stop and say hello to all 3 or 4 stops between Route 69 and the lake. You had to stop and say hello to all their friends. That was a hell of a, what a hell of a place it is.
Yeah. Do you have any pride in the fact that it still is sort of a place, like sort of hallowed ground in terms of your family?
Oh yeah, then we would go in the summer for a week or two, and yeah, it just became like the family vacation spot. Everybody loved it, and you could do what you want, and yep.
What do you remember about Becky as a baby? Any difference? Like,
no, those memories are lost. I think we'll leave that to Sandy. Yeah.
And then.
Well, Becky was a lot more active, and she was into sports more. So I'd have to, Emily would dabble in sports. Becky would pursue them. Yeah, and she was very active and didn't do anything halfway.
Yeah. And then Sandy did say she had a miscarriage at one point too?
Yeah, we had one in there. Yeah, we had one in there. I guess it was after Becky. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Which then she created a demand to have another child. So the rest is history. That's why we're here today. Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
Big gap then. Caroline came along,
Yeah.
much later than Becky, so she,
Yeah, well, I don't regret the decision. Let's get that on film.
That's what she wanted to hear.
Yeah.
And did you so when Caroline was born, were you still working at Brooks, or did you change to you switched to?
Yeah, that's just before I left. Yeah. Yeah. No, I'd left, but we have another job in between. I worked at Bobby Brooks from 69 to 74, and then from 74 to 79, I worked at Electric Storage Battery, which ESB, they made automotive batteries essentially, but also truck and golf cart and aircraft batteries and things like that. And that was downtown, and I was the production planner for that. That was a lot of responsibility as well. I was the production planner for. They had 16 plants. The thing about the battery business is they're expensive to transport, so you build a number of medium-sized or small plants in order to service the national market rather than build all your batteries in Peoria, Illinois, and ship them all over the country. It would be prohibitively expensive. So in any event, that was another guessing game. There's a zillion types of batteries, variety of sizes, and a lot of them are wet or dry, meaning that they don't have battery fluid in them, or they do, and they're charged. If they don't have battery fluid at the retail point, they add the battery fluid and charge the battery. So anyway, these batteries were made at all these locations. We also had some very large customers. Exxon, our biggest one was Montgomery Ward, and Chrysler Automotive, which took a lot of my time. I would typically spend, a typical day would be 40 to 50 phone calls, because we produced Chrysler vehicle batteries at probably a half dozen plants in the United States and Canada. I would give them their schedules of how many batteries to run based on the schedule that Chrysler gave me of what they were going to build. And then the two never met. Chrysler made changes. Batteries got lost. Chrysler was not very well run in those days. We could have batteries are perishable if they're charged wet. Can we take a break?
Yeah, go ahead.
We were talking about my time at the battery company, and I'm trying to remember how many batteries we produced a day. I think it was 40,000 a day. Rounding that number, 42,000. About 20% of them, 20% went to Chrysler. They were always in Chrysler, and there's two divisions, car and truck. So I had a contact at either end, basically for dealing with the daily intricacies of the schedule. I'd give the schedule to my plants. They would produce the batteries. We'd put them on trucks and send them to here, there, and everywhere, which I would direct. There's only so many batteries you can get on a truck because of the weight. You can't ship them air because they're wet, because they're dangerous. They could spark, and so there's all kinds of little idiosyncrasies that go with that. We had our own pallets, which for batteries, which means the pallets have to come back, and there's just so many things that can get out of whack. And car companies, when you have an assembly line with several thousand workers on it, you don't want to get to the end and discover you don't have a battery. You can't push 80 cars an hour off the line effectively. So they get very, very, very excited. And I don't have much control when the batteries leave the plant and get on the truck. These are almost always exclusive use trucks. They're not. We had some trucks of our own, but they didn't often go to car plants. They were more for Montgomery Ward and retail dealers, and so we're using third-party trucks to deliver these. We'd use them. The same carrier again and again and again and again. So, but things could get screwed up, and Chrysler was screwed up, and the trucks would get to the delivery to the assembly plant, and then the load would promptly get lost. So, a plant would be in crisis for weeks on end because I thought I had 2 or 3 days worth of batteries there, you can't be there too much in advance because that becomes a storage problem. But they have these lots for the trailers out out back, and it could just be real. So I'd get panic calls at home sometimes, but I know I'd sent the truck there that morning, and and it was, and what do you do? And we'd talk about, well, I mean, you talk to your contact at Chrysler and say, well, I think we have extra batteries at Bel Air. Maybe we can get you can get some batteries from your Bel Air plant and send them to Warren, Michigan, and it was just all the crazy stuff that happened. But I just loved it because you had total control, typically, and I got to tour a couple of the plants over time, and you could see why things happened. But what would happen at the end of the model year when things were closed for a couple of weeks, they discovered, voila, we have 4 truckloads of batteries that have been here forever. Meanwhile, they're paying demurrage, which is the rental on the truck, on the trailer, and they never put 2 and 2 together. Oh, we're paying all this money for this trailer. Maybe it's got something we needed on there. So that's why Chrysler got into financial trouble in the 80s. So I stayed there until they moved out of, they closed this office in 79, which is when Caroline was born, and I got a job at Allen Bradley out in Mayfield Heights, Highland Heights at that point. Yep.
And then you and Sandy decided to go your
separate ways, right? Yes, and yep.
In retrospect, any hindsight, life lessons you've learned about those types of situations?
Not that I'm going to put on film. All right.
Well,
I know that's one lesson I've learned.
Right.
Right?
Fair enough.
Yeah.
And now you've been with Susan for we got 8 minutes left.
We've been together a long time, more than 25 years.
So,
and we both have said independently that now, I mean, being retired and not having the day-to-day worries of a job, that this has really been probably the happiest time of our lives.
You seem to be enjoying being a grandfather, right?
Oh, I love being a grandfather. Sometimes it's hard when you're not, they're not next door. But I guess I wouldn't want you next door. No offense, Adam. But that's the way of it.
And talk about Atwood. How did you settle in Atwood?
When I found myself out of work, at that point we had 2 houses. Susan had a house, I had a house. This is ridiculous. If I'm in financial crisis, and even if without a job, and even before that, I'm thinking, why are we doing this? We should move in together and get a bigger house or something like that, or do something. And my other thought, well, why don't we buy a weekend place? Would take the money we'd get out of Williams and buy a weekend house. Well, at that point I needed a job, and so one of the people that was interested in me was Great All in New Philadelphia, which solved 2 problems. It provided a place away from the city that we could bounce back and forth to, and it was a good place to work. So that's how I got to Atwood, and that's been really a wonderful decision. The crowd is primarily older, but not ancient down there. There's a real diverse group of people. I mean, we have everything from bank presidents who probably have $20 million in their bank account to people that were pipe fitters. So.
And you can't really tell Walter's life story without talking about the fact that you probably should be long dead by now.
Right. Oh, yeah, we had a few medical emergencies. Yes, that have really turned out very well. I mean, I couldn't have, I mean, they were a tough go at the time for me, and I'm sure for my kin and Susan, but they have all turned out well, particularly when I have friends and neighbors who have, have passed for cancer and things like that, which isn't as readily curable. And so I've come out the other side, yeah, pretty darn well with, 3 near-death experiences, maybe 4, depending on how you count them, and 3 heart stoppages and revivals, and 1 near-death experience at the clinic 10 years ago, or 12 years ago.
I mean, that one really was epic, right?
Yeah. Oh, Lord, yeah.
Is there a way to sort of like encapsulate like what they did with your blood transfer,
Yeah. It was on a Saturday. I was helping Becky and company, which was the West family, up on Scarborough, and I was shoveling gravel out of a truck with Debbie, out of one of the pickups, and I started to have arm pains and neck pains, and Debbie being familiar with that stuff. So I went in and laid down and was in the denial game for a half an hour or so. Yeah, and so then it became, well, I probably should go get this looked into. I think I started to have pains up in my jaw, which I figured this is more than just a sprain. So Becky was driving me to the first aid down to the hospitals, and we decided, well, where should we go? We were traditionally university hospital people, but the clinic had the reputation, and so as we're driving down Cedar Road, we made the decision to go to the clinic because they'd be more ready to handle me. So I got in there, and they triaged me right away, and I was most impressed with the fact that the orderly ran the gurney down to the elevator, up the elevator, and across Carnegie, and to the heart catheterization suite. They did the work. Everything went beautifully. I came out. The family came in to check on me, and the bottom fell out. I started this uncontrolled internal bleeding, passed out, and I was unconscious for a week. And and then that goes from then, and then recovered and went to rehab, and have just stayed. I went to phase 2 rehab, which is a structured rehab where they take your blood pressure in and out every day and measure your response to certain exercises, to an open-ended thing where you're still in the same facility. There's a nurse present once a month. You get your blood pressure checked, and if there is an emergency, which I subsequently had 10 years later, that they're there for you. So then 2 years ago, I had a blood clot problem. Oh, I had a valve transplant in between there because we reached a point where my heart wasn't functioning. That was 7 years after my stents were put in. I'd had additional stents and stent cleanings done, but we reached a point where the valve needed to be replaced. We put that in. That never really worked out very well. And my cardiologist was kind of unresponsive to my complaints. I then 2 years ago I was working out and had a blood clot in my lower leg that couldn't be denied. Went to the nurse, and we called the rescue squad, and I went through the emergency room at Altman and Canton, and transferred to Akron General to find a vascular surgeon. I was there for 10 days, I think, and then went to the clinic and died on the table 3 times down there as they tried to put everything right. My heart had gotten so weak that I couldn't tolerate my valve, basically, that I couldn't tolerate the anesthesia and the trauma associated with surgery. They transferred me to the clinic, and I ended up totaling 2 months at the clinic with a new valve and a stent in rehab, and I'm now back or better than I was when I started. So I am so lucky that I lived in this time and lived in this area and was able to get the right care at the right time. And I've come out better than I was, because I'm much more active now than I was 3 years ago before all this took place and my heart valve wasn't functioning like it should have been.
Do you feel resilient? Do you feel grateful? Like, what are the things you
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm even giving money to the clinic for heart research, which I thought I would never do. Not a lot, but I give something, just that my heart's in the right place.
These last 10 years are...
They've been very good. Yeah, 12 years, yeah, since I had that trauma. Yep. So I can handle anything, at this point. At some point I'm going to have to get this thing replaced, and my stents in my knees, but...
And you'd like to apologize for putting your family through all...
Well, oh yeah, absolutely. But I did. It wasn't intentional. But they've held up really well, and I know I've said some bad things, particularly to Becky, because she's always the one taking the lead, and I'm the one who's swearing at her for giving them permission to give me a tracheotomy. And, oh Lord, we had drama, but she knows me, and she lets her roll off her back. Yeah.